Hi, I'm Rob McLean, and today on The Mountain Garden, we're going to cover soap making. Now, to begin, soap making uses both a fat, which is some kind of oil, and sodium hydroxide, which is a caustic chemical, I suppose. The two combined together is what makes soap. Most all regular soap is composed of these two components. Now, you can make soap with just the fat and the sodium hydroxide, and you would have just pure soap, no fragrance or anything. And many of the old-fashioned ways to make laundry detergent were made in this way. Today, what I'm going to be doing is going to be making soap, but I'm going to be using herbs and leaves from around us here in the forest to add some fragrance to the soap. Today, to complete our project, I'm going to use a few items, and what we're using is coconut oil, and this I got from Costco. Coconut oil is a very good ingredient for soap making. Sometimes it can be a little bit harsh, but if you actually do what they call super fatting, which is adding more than the lye can turn into soap, what you end up with is a conditioned soap, which is what you want for a beauty bar or a bath bar. I have the sodium hydroxide. This is something that you can find in most small hardware stores, and it's usually with the drain cleaners. This is actually a component that is in Drano, and it is the active ingredient. The reason that it works is because it dissolves oil to unclog drains. I'm also going to be using a stick blender. This is for blending the components together once we get everything in the right amount. I also have a kitchen scale here, and this is important so that we end up with the exact right amount. I have several containers. These are both stainless steel, and also I have some glass. It's important that if you're going to be using lye, that you do not use anything that is made out of aluminum. Lye will react with aluminum, it will dissolve the aluminum and create gases that you do not want to breathe. So make sure that any of the containers that you're using are safe with lye. You can go on the internet and look up what you shouldn't be using. I would stick to both stainless steel and glass. Today for the fragrance, I'm going to be using both California Bay Laurel and a type of ground salvia, which both have a nice herbal fragrance. And because different types of fragrances in leaves and herbs are caused by their essential oils, some of the essential oils and the nice smell that comes from them is dissolvable more in a fat than in a liquid base, in a water base. So I have some of these components, and this is just in some of the coconut oil that I've heated up a little bit so that it will release the fragrance. I've also done the same thing. This is in water, and it's just the same herbs, and I've put it in water so that I get the other components of the aroma. So to start, we're going to need to measure out the components that we need. So what I'm going to be doing is I will turn on the scale.
Let's go back to the start part.
Today to start, I'm going to be using my kitchen scale. I tend to use grams rather than ounces and pounds. The reason for this is because grams are a smaller unit, so it's easier to be more accurate. However, if you insist on using ounces and pounds, the conversions and the calculators for those are easily found online. Most scales today, however, do have a selectable unit. So like mine, I can do either, but today I'll be working in grams. As you can see, I've turned on my scale, and I'm going to put my stainless steel bowl on top. You can see that I've had a little bit of some of the oil in here already, but that doesn't really matter, so disregard the residue there. Now, I've tared this scale so that once the bowl is on it, it's about 0. I'm going to begin adding the coconut oil, and we need 936 grams. So I'll begin adding the coconut oil. and that's 937 grams, so that's pretty close. I'm gonna leave it at that. Now that we have measured that out, I'm going to set it aside. Now we're going to measure out our sodium hydroxide. To do this, we want to wear some kind of chemical resistant gloves. You may have the thick black rubber chemical resistant gloves. Here with me today, I have nitrile gloves. These should be sufficient as long as you're careful and you don't get it up past your wrists. Shouldn't be too hard to do. There we go, gloves are on. Now for this project, I'm going to tear this to make this 0. We are going to need 137 grams of sodium hydroxide. There we go, 137 grams. I'm going to set this aside. Now we're going to need water for this. Now that I've changed this, I need to re-tear the scale. I need 356 grams of water. 356 grams. I'm also setting this aside. Now, so that I don't ruin my scale while I'm mixing these two together, I'm going to go ahead and put the scale off to the side and put my mixing bowl in the center. I'm going to add the water first to my bowl. Now, as always in chemical mixing, you want to make sure that the chemical is diluting as you mix it. If I add the water to the sodium hydroxide, the water is going to heat up from an exothermic reaction that happens when you mix water and sodium hydroxide. If I just put water in there, it will quickly reach the boiling point and can actually leave the cup, spatter everywhere. You do not want to do that. So instead, we have our water in our bowl, and I'm going to slowly add the sodium hydroxide to the water. And it's good if you even are mixing it as you go. Now the chemical reaction between sodium hydroxide and water will heat the water to about 200 degrees. You want to make sure that whatever you're using can withstand 200 degrees at least. The water can get as high as the boiling point, so make sure you wouldn't use anything that you wouldn't put boiling water in or on. So I'm using my wooden board here because I do not want to melt the plastic lifetime table that I'm using. You can see here that it's actually foaming a little bit. That foaming is the water and the sodium hydroxide combining together. And I'm going to continue to stir this. And now as I stir this, eventually, once everything has completely dissolved, the water will turn more clear again. So we'll come back and show you what that looks like. Okay, as you can see, the liquid is again mostly clear. I've been using this fork that had a little bit of soap from a previous project. But you can see that that liquid is mostly clear now. This is ready to go. Something that I need to correct about the weight of the fat that I put into the bowl. Remember earlier in the video, I talked about using some of the fat to capture the aroma from these herbs. Now, if I added this, I would have put too much in. So I need to exchange the weight of this for some that I already put in the bowl. What I'm going to do that is I've placed the bowl back onto the scale. I've tared the scale to 0, and I'm going to pour this into the bowl at the edge. I'm not sure if you can see the numbers there, but I have just about 70 grams that I've added back into the bowl. So now what I'm going to do to make sure that the weight still stays the same is I'm going to take out enough of this to make it 0 again. That way I will know that I've exchanged the right amount of the fat. Okay, there we go. So now I'm back at 0. I've corrected my problem of adding too much fat with the fat that I used to capture the oil. Now that I've made my correction, I'm going to take this over to my outdoor range and heat it up to 120 to 130 degrees. We'll do that and we'll be right back. So we've heated the oil, and as you can see, it's liquefied. And I just used my kitchen oil and candy thermometer. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the oil to my pan. It's a little larger just so that I can do the mixing without having to worry about it splashing out. Okay, that's pretty good. Now, I still have my gloves on. We're going to add the sodium hydroxide, but I'm going to mix it as I do that. To do the mixing, I have my stick blender, and I'm going to put that all the way down. I don't need a very high speed, so I'm going to turn it on low. And as I add this, I'm going to mix and slowly add this in. I'm going to continue mixing until it actually starts to thicken. That is what they call trace. Now, trace is when the chemical reaction between the oil and the lye actually start to make soap. It will start to thicken up, and you just continue mixing until you see that. I'm going to actually add some of the herbs that I used to give the soap an exfoliating component as well as more of the fragrance. So you can see that it's blended the herbs into the mix, and it's starting to thicken a little bit, but we'll come back and show you what it looks like when it's done. As you can see here, this is what you want. Now, ours is thickened up, and to do this you may actually need to heat it on low while you blend. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Some fats are different than others, and depending on what you add as fragrance or other additives may increase or decrease the time that it takes. Now that we have it to this consistency, we're going to get some items to form our soap into a shape that we'd like, and we can do some other decorative work on top of that once we're done. So we'll take this, and I have here, this is just a cupcake pan that's a silicone. Remember, no aluminum. There's a lot of bakeware that's aluminum. You still don't want to use aluminum. Even though now it's mostly soap, you still could have a reaction which you don't want, and it can also discolor the soap. So I'm using silicone, which is not going to have any problem with this. Okay. Now I'm using just a glass dish here. I've used some of the coconut oil on a piece of just regular paper, and that's just to help you get it back out of the form. It'll stick in there fairly well if you don't do that. Now remember, if you're sensitive to heat, this is still pretty warm, and you may want to use something to scoop it with. I'm going to go ahead and use my hands, which I may be sorry for, I'm not sure. I might want to use a bowl or now this may be, of course, now I have wasps in my soap. You may want to use a fork or a spatula or something to be able to put the soap into the container because it is still pretty warm. You can vary the thickness that you want your final soap to be. Of course, that's personal preference. Now with this, you just need to press it into the container so it's nice and even. Have some little swirls or some rough surface, or if you prefer something super flat, you can use, again, a spatula to smooth the surface out. I prefer to have it a little bit rough so that it looks more like it's been homemade. So I'm actually going to make mine have a little roughness on the surface. The thing that's nice with these is these are very easy to decorate. Just like cupcakes, once you get it all into the forms. Now, because I'm here in the redwood forest, I've chosen to take a few pieces of some dried redwood leaves and use those as a decoration on the top. You, of course, can use anything that you have available that you wouldn't mind having in your bathroom or in your soap or in your shower. Of course, these are decorative, and once you start to use the soap, they will fall out. But it does make it look nice if you're going to be giving it as a gift. Now you can see some of this is still cooling down. This should solidify after it's back to room temperature. And you can see it's even still bubbling a little bit there. Once this is done, it'll be great soap. I hope you enjoy.